Okay. Hi, this is The Grass is Greener on WXRW 104.1 FM in Milwaukee. I am the host of the program, Gary Grass. With me is my co-host, Babette Gruneau.
Hi, and this evening we have Ricardo Vaz, our South American correspondent, and I believe he's with Venezuela analysis as well.
Oh, nice to have you.
Hey, great to be back. Yes, I mean, everything else compared to, Latin America correspondence, just a side job.
Yeah, well, it's we should put you to work for more hours then. I got an email from you before the show, by the way, that said you were heating up your takes on recent events, and I had a little. I don't know. I'm not sure if my complaint is with you or just with the English language, because it sounds like what makes a take hot is that it's fresh off the griddle, and if you put it back on the griddle, you can't really make it a hot take anymore. It's what makes it hot is that it's just occurred to you now and you've never thought of it before, and it's just like off the top of your head. And so how do you get that back? That's the question I have.
To me, it seems like it would be more like you're warming things up. You're coming up with the stuff. So to me,
warmed over takes.
Oh, no.
Microwave.
Anyways, why we invited you back on this week is because of the what looks like the Trump administration heating up for another war, and against, this time, Venezuela. And so we thought, let's talk about that. Let's see what you think on it. And I'm sure you mentioned that there were other news items that you wanted to discuss.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in Latin America. I've been seeing a lot of different things coming up, but I think Venezuela, where you're at, is like the center of everything. I mean, the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, come on, let's talk Venezuela.
Yeah, let's talk Venezuela, and then Colombia has also been very hot on the news these days. And then in the end, if we have time, we can touch on a few other topics, more like lightning round. So yes, I mean, the situation here is very tense. Maybe it got a little less tense in the last week or two, but it's still, I mean, every week or so we hear reports that the U.S. forces here in the Caribbean have just bombed another boat with no reasonable explanation, no evidence that it was carrying drugs. I mean, the whole narrative, if you look at it, is just so absurd that the only way to stop drugs from reaching communities in the U.S. is to bomb them here in Caribbean waters. I mean, not to mention the other things that
Well, I mean, you're bombing these tiny little boats too. I mean, it's like I remember reports that like the Mexican tuna fleet was responsible for some incredible amount of drugs coming into the country on tuna cans in the holds of these enormous ships. And it's like I mean that was decades ago, right? I don't want to accuse Mexico of anything.
More recently, it has been the banana shipments from Ecuador. These big containers that have been a useful source for shipping drugs. But in any case, I mean, the main driver of this surge in overdoses is fentanyl, and Venezuela has nothing to do with fentanyl. So, I mean, we can probably talk about the narrative in a bit, but right now we have these regular bombings offshore, and the administration for, I don't know, maybe a month now has been first, through these anonymous sources in the media, and then, Trump will always say the quiet part out loud, that it is considering strikes on inside Venezuelan territory. So, against whatever they determine to be a drug target, because, as we've seen in this, month and a half since these bombings began, the threshold for evidence is not that it's low, it's just completely inexistent. And actually today there was a report on The Guardian that it's the CIA that's providing intelligence, real-time intelligence on which targets to bomb, and they are not, forced to share that intelligence, so it can just can just stay classified forever.
Yeah.
So if you look past the surface, and I mean it's not very hard given how many cracks there are in the story, and this has also been openly admitted. I mean, the ultimate goal is regime change. I mean, not that that it ever changed, but now, like a more forceful pressure to see if they can finally get rid of the Bolivarian government. And I mean, that's what they're trying to do. They are doing these constant shows of force. I mean, the other day there were B-52 bombers flying inside Venezuelan airspace. So they are trying to send a message, seeing if somehow the process here is going to collapse on its own, if the different factions are going to turn on each other, which comes from a very poor understanding of the reality, something that we've seen with the Guaido experiment a few years ago. But that's clearly the goal, and of course now it's much more serious because you have these kinetic strikes, which is very unfortunate euphemism. But if they start striking targets on land, then it has a very big potential for escalation.
Well, I mean, it would be an escalation, it'd be a huge escalation.
Yeah, but I mean, then does Venezuela respond? Does it do like a symbolic response? I mean, from there, all bets are off, and of course, you cannot discard the possibility that the U.S. would just attempt to decapitate the leadership of the Bolivarian Revolution. I mean, they have the capability to do that. The question is, first, if it's in their interest, and secondly, if they're actually taking actions that maximize their interest, which is also not assured.
Well, I mean,
he doesn't like Trump doesn't like to have a failure, and he failed the first time around during his first administration to get rid of Maduro, and so of course he's going to want to, and to take a second crack at the cat. Because I mean,
remove his failure from the record.
Right, and I mean, Guaido was kind of an embarrassment, I'd have to say.
I think that's an understatement. Yeah.
Second euphemism of the day.
I mean, first of all, I wanted to back up just because this whole thing where there's like no evidence. It's like, I mean, that's why we separated from England in the first place, because we wanted to be able to carry out summary executions with secret evidence, right? That was the whole point. That's what we mean by liberty in this country, right? Okay, so just okay, I got it off my chest how ridiculous that is, but
I actually no, go ahead.
Yeah, no, but I mean, you first of all, the CIA needs to be mentioned separately here because we've had these leaks. Oh, the CIA is going to be allowed to operate in Venezuela. It's like, when has the CIA not been operating in Venezuela? Right. First of all, I mean, it's. I mean, this is a part of the. I mean, it's nothing new that they're going to be there, right? The fact that this is being leaked and being stated by Trump, and this is all stuff that is just designed to intimidate and to like threaten, right? That's the only purpose of it. It's not actually any sort of revelation.
Yeah, I mean, it's we joked here that what else are they going to tell us that is new? But it is true. I mean, they're just making threats, and what's perhaps not surprising, but at least disappointing, I don't know, is that the media, the New York Times in particular, is the vehicle for these threats. But as you were saying, the Guaido precedent is very relevant because Trump was notoriously upset at his advisors because they sold him this idea that just proclaim this guy and the army is going to flock to his side and Maduro will be gone in days, if not weeks.
Did John Bolton have anything to do with that advice? Is that why he's being prosecuted now?
Yeah, John Bolton, Pompeo kind of redeemed himself, and Abrams a bit later. But yes, I mean Bolton was the main salesman of this adventure. And of course, once that didn't happen, it became an embarrassment, and Trump was of course annoyed that because I mean he's been on a reality show judge for a long time, and he doesn't like to be pulled like that. So that's why perhaps this time they sold it different. So they said, oh, we're going to launch a campaign against quote unquote narco terrorism. And with that in mind, maybe he leaves himself some space to back down, because I mean to overthrow the government, to overthrow the Bolivarian process here, it's going to be an absolute disaster, and it's the kind of long-term, open-ended, expensive commitment that is sure to alienate a section of the Trump base because that's part of his platform. So I think for now, at least, given also the size of the buildup, they're just going to continue with this, Rambo antics in the Caribbean, just, summarily executing people with no evidence, just to, whenever they need to divert attention or where they just want to. This is their idea of
Well,
projecting
it's not
strength.
diverting attention as much as it used to. I mean, it's already seems like it's kind of old hat now. I mean, unless he escalates, it's like, now we know that he does this. He blows up boats in the Caribbean.
Yeah, that's the
Don't go
thing. I mean,
fishing in the Caribbean.
and so, yeah, but that's what he was saying at some point, because I mean, Trump is always looking for a victory, regardless of whether it constitutes a victory or not. But he was saying, oh, now there are no boats. It's a miracle. Not even fishing boats are going out, which of course is not true. But in his mind, I mean, the problem isn't real to begin with, right? I mean, as we were discussing in the beginning,
Right.
there isn't a significant flow of drugs from Venezuela. So,
Right.
I mean, if the problem is imaginary, you can claim that to have solved it at any point. So maybe, and this might be wishful thinking, Trump at some point will just get tired and, divert his attention somewhere else and say, oh, we fixed it. No more votes are coming from Venezuela, and now we're going to start addressing the issue of land cartels in Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, you had the head of Southcom, resign, and there's some, well, not publicly announced but leaked, statement that this was because he's opposed to these lawless actions in the Caribbean and doesn't want to be responsible for it. But kind of in the back of my mind is, you know, members of the military also do not like, generals do not like to be embroiled in losing wars and involved in wars that they're going to lose. It's not a feather in their cap to like lose a war. So it's the idea that, maybe part of this is not just what had happened that was unlawful, but where it was going,
Yeah.
and not wanting to be saddled with, oh look, I'm now the person in command of this doomed military exercise that is, that the president has these delusions is going to be cheap and easy and go in and solve this problem. And in fact, it's actually going to be much more than he bargained for. And, we're going to be giving him these, these force depletion estimates or whatever, that says we're going to lose a lot of guys in this. It's not going to be good for you. And they just don't want to be part of that whole forthcoming scenario.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a risk, and there's a clear risk of biting off more than they can chew. And in the case of Halsey, actually, here's a hot take conspiracy theory. You must have read that in one of the latest strikes, there were survivors.
Yes.
Yes,
And
the
this was the first.
Trinidadians or no, the Trinidadians were killed.
No,
That's
the
that's
answer
a
is
separate issue, right? That's a I
yeah,
mean,
we can go to
we want to
Trinidad
talk about
later.
Trinidad in a little bit. Yeah,
But in the first strike, this was the Intercept that reported it. The first strike on September 2nd, the first bombing did not kill all the survivors, and then they circled back and bombed it again to ensure that everyone was dead.
right.
And this
No
time around,
witnesses.
yes, and this time around with this semi-submersible vessel, which is more than likely to have been carrying drugs. I mean, this is a very popular means right now because it's hard to detect and whatnot, and it's cheap to build. This time around, there were survivors, and actually, they were rescued, which then created an immediate legal conundrum. And now, what do we do with the survivors? Are they prosecuted? Are they actually enemy combatants? Because all of this is in a very undefined legal area, and then
Well,
you
I
end
mean,
up with
it's well defined as being extrajudicial murder. So it's like if you're trying to claim that it's legal, then you have a difficult task in front of you. And now,
yes,
that's
but
that's your problem. The problem isn't that it's legally undefined; it's that you're trying to make up some sort of story, and you don't know what your story is because you're just making it up as you go along.
Well, Trump has come
exactly.
up with this new definition of it.
Yeah, so Trump the administration sent a note to Congress calling it a non-international armed conflict, and that the
Which
people they were
sounds
killing
strange.
were unlawful combatants. But I mean that's also a very unconvincing, to say the least, explanation. There's also a justification produced by the Justice Department that just makes up a list of cartels and argues that they can just be bombed at any time in any place. But in any case, it would have caused I mean, if they were to be prosecuted in U.S. courts, it would have opened up a lot of scrutiny on the administration's actions. So in the end, what they did was that they just repatriated them, one of them to Ecuador and the other to Colombia. So again, nothing to do with Venezuela. And the Colombian guy was apparently in very bad shape. He was had some brain trauma and was attached to a ventilator, as I understand. But the Colombians said they would investigate and prosecute him. But the Ecuadorians, which I found surprising given their subservience to Trump right now, they just let him walk. They said there was no evidence to prosecute. But again, it begs the question, and if these are now to use Secretary of War Hegseth's expression, this is the Al Qaeda of the Western Hemisphere, and then you just send them back to their countries and forget about it. So it's just undermines the credibility.
Well, it's not like we've never done that with Al Qaeda. Sometimes we'll install them in a foreign country that where we want regime change, right?
Yes.
We've done all sorts of different things with Al Qaeda. We've been on all sides of that map. So I mean, that's
from funding to prosecute.
Yes, yes. It's from extrajudicial murder campaign and full scale war to putting them in charge. I mean, it's just a crazy.
Oh yeah, now they've been redeemed and go to the UN and so on.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You get your put on a suit and then you can have your picture taken, but go back to the military fatigues and you can't.
But you were talking about the Trinidadians, and that was just a few days before.
Yeah, I mean that's another case where you say here's the administration that's been very very friendly with Trump. You've had a president in Trinidad and Tobago who has been very favorable towards all these strikes in the Caribbean, and now you have Trinidadians that are killed, and now she's got to duck out and avoid questions from the press now.
Yeah, she has to exit through some side doors to escape from the press, and it's actually
have Pablo Escobar build her a tunnel.
But it's very shameful for her because she didn't have to say anything, and she just went on the record saying, I hope the drug smugglers are violently killed. I have no sympathy for them. I don't care if their bodies just lay out in the ocean and so on. And now, here you have Trinidadian families asking, and rightly so, asking for explanations, because the guy one of them in these media reports had been in Venezuela for 3 months for temporary work, and it's not out of this world to speculate that he was involved in smuggling. It's not that he didn't go there for tourism or fishing, but again, that's besides the point, because the Trump administration no one has the authority to extrajudicially execute someone for an allegation that they are transporting drugs to Trinidad. Talk about extraterritorial overreach. So it now what began as something that was very much focused on Venezuela now is targeting other countries in the Caribbean. There's a big rhetorical and not just rhetorical escalation with Petro, and even for the administration's own purposes, it's beginning to backfire, because you had this Caribbean country that you were mentioning who were very much on board with military cooperation with Trump and so on. And now, it starts to come with a political cost. Last week, Halsey, just before he resigned, the Southern Command Chief Admiral, he went to Antigua and Barbuda and then to Grenada to kind of convince them to join this military buildup. And in Antigua, the prime minister was very forceful in saying, we have no interest in installing military assets here in the island. We are in favor of keeping the peace. But we'll collaborate in their security exercise coming up next year. But that's that. And in Grenada, the U.S. Southern Command was putting pressure to install radars and some technical equipment in the airport, which would facilitate any kind of aerial bombing campaign in the region. And the Grenadians, I think, basically stalled. They just said, we're going to evaluate and discuss and debate, and we'll get back to you. Don't call us, we'll call you. And
well, they've had their own years ago, they experienced this being on the other side of it, being on the side that was getting attacked.
Yes, and they wanted to install radars in an airport that's called Maurice Bishop. So
Oh my
goodness.
goodness.
It just couldn't be any more jarring and insulting. And of course, I mean, it's very difficult. These are very small islands, it's very easy to pressure them, but I think there's now some pushback, and hopefully, I mean, the Caribbean community has been very divided in recent times, but maybe now they can find some sort of unity, even if it's just not interference in these affairs.
Well, I mean, apparently they do a very bad job of picking targets if they're going out and they're killing Trinidadians and Ecuadorians and this whole mishmash of like people from all different countries around the region. It would be one thing if they were all citizens of the country you've designated as your official enemy, whose people you're trying to support by killing them at sea. But the fact that you're getting to spread around the damage to a lot of potential allies or potential adversaries, and you're putting a lot of people against you, because if they can do it to citizens of this country and this country and this country and this country, they've hit at least four citizens of at least four different countries so far, right? What are the odds that eventually they're going to get one of your people too, and then you're going to have to answer for that? So they've just done a very bad job of target selection, and it's gotta backfire that way.
Yeah, actually, about a week ago or so, there has been, to their credit, some U.S. representatives, Rand Paul in particular, have been very forceful in questioning this way of operating in the Caribbean. And one congressman, I don't remember who it was, raised this issue specifically. What happens when we kill a U.S. national in one of these attacks? I mean, not just because it doesn't suggest that, at least from our perspective, that a U.S. life is more valuable than any other, but it would raise inside the U.S. a whole different set of questions. But I think it goes back when we were saying that
they'll outsource it to Israel, because then it won't matter.
Yeah, okay, that's always a way out.
They have a little pass card that allows them to kill Americans with impunity. So,
but we were talking about the CIA being involved in providing intelligence and selecting targets in real time. But I think this just shows that they have very little clue of what they're bombing. I mean, of course, if you see a semi-submersible vessel, it's likely that it's transporting drugs. But these little speedboats with outboard motors, I mean, they might just be out smuggling gasoline or something else,
or endangered parrots,
or even human trafficking. I mean, this route from Venezuela to Trinidad, it's a very short distance, and it has been known as a human trafficking or even a migration route. So it's very close to, it's not random, but it's very close to random.
Yeah, and regardless, no fentanyl probably even on unlikely drug missions, right? Because that's just not.
Yes, that just goes directly to Mexico, and then it crosses the border by land. So Venezuela has nothing to do with the fentanyl. And now we can talk a bit about the narrative, because even the reports from the DEA. So the DEA sends out its drug assessment report every year, and the 2024 report did not mention Venezuela at all.
Wow.
It was just a non-issue whatsoever. And then this year, 2025, they talk about Tren de Aragua, because now everything is Tren de Aragua. But they say themselves, there's no evidence of Tren de Aragua being involved in any significant drug activities beyond, this petty street level distribution, which is a run-of-the-mill criminal activity, but not any kind of centralized never mind production, distribution of drugs, and certainly it never had that kind of muscle to move drugs internationally. So
right, they don't have any independent access to drugs from abroad. They have to rely entirely on the CIA for that.
Yes. Well, now that the CIA is in the country, apparently.
What it reminds me of is how they built up this whole story around when they wanted to get rid of Noriega. And so it was this whole, oh, he's this drug lord now. Before he was, our friend. And then suddenly, things changed.
Yeah, same with Saddam Hussein. But
yes.
Just to complete the drug numbers, the latest reports from the DEA, there were some independent ones, and there was one from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and basically they all say that the volume of cocaine that flows through Venezuela is between 5 and 10%. It's all produced in Colombia, Peru and Bolivia, but mostly Colombia. And if you look at the map and if you want to reach the US, then it's much more geographically sensible to go through the Pacific. And that's precisely what happens. I think 85% of it flows through the Pacific. And actually, it's now been dislocated from Colombia to Ecuador because of the instability and insecurity there that provides a lot more ease and opportunity to move narcotics. And so, I mean, the volume that flows through Venezuela is very small. And also, if it goes from Venezuela to Trinidad, that's then going to Europe and West Africa, and it would have to hop on a lot of islands to eventually reach the US. So it goes back to this idea that the problem to begin with is not real. But this is a narrative because there's this whole stigma about narco-terrorism that they reheat unlike my takes, this is a reheated narrative that comes up every now and then whenever they need to demonize someone. But the comparison to Panama has been brought up a few times because this right now is the largest military buildup since the invasion of Panama in
Operation Just Cause.
I mean, who comes up with this name?
Just because we feel like it.
Just because, yeah.
But the parallels have a very low ceiling because Venezuela is, I don't know how many times bigger. It has 10 times more population, and so the idea that this force would be able to just invade and install a puppet government is beyond fanciful. But that doesn't mean that it cannot still cause a lot of damage even from a distance.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the little Bay of Piglets event earlier. I mean, there is a boundless belief that you can succeed with a few men, and it's just the level of delusion is just incredible.
I did want to mention, discuss with you on this, the inclusion of now an award winner of the Nobel quote-unquote Peace Prize in this whole thing. This person who was involved in previous coups getting the Peace Prize. It seems strange.
Yeah, strange is the third euphemism of the day. Actually, I'm writing a piece for FAIR on the media coverage of Maria Corina Machado, and one common element is that someone wins the Peace Prize and you have to explain who this person is.
Right.
And they
people who listen to our show would know already, but people who don't.
But
New York Times,
But it's remarkable that everyone starts the story in mid-2002. Oh, she created an NGO focused on electoral transparency. And, wait a minute, just a couple of months earlier, she was involved in this coup attempt that deposed Chavez for maybe some 48 hours. But it's hilarious because there were a lot of people who signed the so-called Carmona Decree, which, did away with all institutions, did away with the Constitution, installed a de facto dictatorship, and she signed it. And then years later, she said, "Oh, I thought it was just an attendance registry. I didn't know what I was signing." But anyway, I mean, it's not like the Nobel Peace Prize.
I mean, you go look at the revolution will not be televised. You go look at the scene where they're standing up and they're like going through and they're saying. The Supreme Court is hereby abolished. This is hereby abolished. And they're just going through and eliminating every democratic institution that exists in the country.
And they all cheer.
And they all cheer, right? And this was the coup. This has been the sort of ongoing opposition legacy. I mean, that pattern was sort of set very early and never completely evolved out of that. You still have these kind of like crazy, we'll conform a little more formally to the institutions of government. We're still going to have Juan Guaido, claiming to be president on some really ridiculous fig leaf argument that makes no sense. I mean, I don't know. It's just never really changed dramatically from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has a lot to do with the opposition being linked to these historic Venezuelan elites and oligarchic families that believe the country should be theirs to rule. But in the case of Machado, she has more or less always been on the same path, which is overthrow the government by whatever means necessary. And these means are never peaceful. They are very rarely democratic. But at other times, when the opposition has tried different routes, she was marginalized because she was always this extremist figure. And then, because the other methods failed, she kind of came back as, by default, perhaps, she became the main figure of the opposition because she's always had this very uncompromising position. But we shouldn't spend too much time on her because I mean, we already know what she's all about and we are all in agreement. But what's remarkable is that she's giving interviews about winning the Peace Prize, saying we need a coalition of internal and external forces and then she uses some euphemism to end this tragedy. And I was saying that the different administrations over the years, whenever they want to do something that's illegal, they found some kind of way to change the concept. So I remember that when they wanted to bomb targets far away, they changed the concept of imminent threat. So imminent started to meaning something that didn't mean about to happen. It was a much more vague definition. Then they also changed the definition of civilian so that all adult males were considered enemy combatants, and that lowered the number of civilian casualties. So in the case of Maria Corina Machado, what she said was, "Oh, we are already at war. Maduro has declared war on the Venezuelan people. Who knows how this happens? And now we need to be liberated."
It's because he showed up when the Supreme Court asked for the election evidence, right? Unlike her, the one she was like sort of the power behind the candidate, right? The gal who was like always alongside the candidate and all the things, like sort of holding up, using him as a puppet because he's so old he couldn't lift his arms.
There was one report, I think it was the New York Times, when they started to talk more openly about regime change, that said the Trump administration has grown frustrated by Maduro not leaving power voluntarily and denying narco-terrorism allegations. So he refuses to leave power because the U.S. told him to, and he refuses to acknowledge that he's a narco-terrorist, even though all the evidence says, even the DEA says, that is not. So then that's more or less how...
His choice to run for re-election was very disappointing to some people here, right? Not really actually, surprised. I mean,
but now the president who is more firmly in the spotlight is our neighbor, Gustavo Petro. Mm-hmm. Fresh off having his U.S. visa canceled for, one final thing about Machado. She's, right now, there's kind of a litmus test on, basic human decency, which is, condemning the genocide in Palestine.
Mm-hmm. Right, and she goes and shakes hands with Netanyahu.
Not just that, she had a congratulatory phone call with Netanyahu a week ago and said that, she appreciated...
his vigor with which he's approaching the problem in Gaza.
Yes, his resolute actions in Gaza. So, we have a Nobel Peace Prize on hashtag Team Genocide.
Yeah, I know. Great. And she was, and it's not as bad as Netanyahu, but she was just, went and visited George W. Bush. And George W. Bush, famously the guy that had a Nobel Peace Prize awarded to someone just for getting him out of the way. because Obama had done nothing to win that Peace Prize other than
Yeah.
that remove Bush, who they thought was like the anti-recipient, and so they give it to Obama as a snub to Bush. And
Yeah,
now
there
that
were
yeah.
hopes for Obama that, I mean, you can discuss how realistic those hopes were, but it's fair to say that he did not live up to those expectations of
No,
peace.
no, he definitely bombed about seven too many countries. But anyway,
But yeah, as I was saying now, Petro, who has, to his credit, been very dignified in
Mm-hmm.
not accepting U.S. bullying. He had his visa canceled a few weeks ago at the UN General Assembly because he was out there on the streets with Roger Waters calling for the arrest of Netanyahu. But now there were the first reports that in one of these bombings before the submersible vessel killed Colum I mean, it was a speedboat that went from Colombia and had Colombian nationals. And he said, this is a violation of our sovereignty. We're not going to accept these extrajudicial executions. And he told the country's prosecutor's office to open an investigation. And he said, we await explanations from the Trump administration. And of course, the Trump administration, Trump himself on social media just goes ballistic and says, "Oh, he's a very bad leader. He's very unpopular." This typical rant, and now they are threatening tariffs. Then an advisor came on the next day saying, "Oh, never mind the tariffs. That was just a manner of
yeah,
speaking."
yeah.
Now they're considering sanctions against Petro and other high-ranking Colombian officials. But it kind of ties to your point of just getting more enemies along the way and alienating ever more foreign leaders. And here we're talking about Colombia. Colombia is a very strategic post
Oh
for the
God!
U.S.
I mean, look at how much the U.S. has invested in Colombia. I mean, it's been the
I mean,
number one recipient after Israel. It's been the number one in
and
the
it,
hemisphere.
and it was called the Israel of South America for a reason. And a lot of the CIA and DEA operations in the hemisphere hinge on Colombia. And of course, it goes to show that there's an inverse correlation between DEA presence and drug production. But
Right.
in any case, I think the US, uh, I don't think they're going to go as far as trying to overthrow Petro. They might just bet that, I mean, he's not going to run for re-election, so they might just bet that the right wing
Just kind
will
of wait him out.
eventually, yeah, see if the right wing comes back to power. And it's still not clear who is going to run on Petro's party's platform. But this escalation of rhetoric is generating a sense of national pride and not being bullied by Trump. I mean, at this stage, only the far right lunatics like Javier Milei from Argentina are willing to go to Washington and bow before Trump and extend their hands, hoping for some aid. I mean, the proper leaders like Petro has, I think he has shown a lot of character, especially as
Mm-hmm.
as his term has gone on. They will stand up and they will not be humiliated just like this.
I mean, yeah, good for Colombia.
So, what's going on in Peru? They just had a change of government?
Yes, I was just reading that this is now their seventh president in 9 years.
Hmm.
So fair to say that that's a high risk post. And this is now he's called Jose Enrique Heri, and he's a congressman. From what I could gather, he's a crook. He's been involved in corruption scandals and so on. I think that's kind of a prerequisite to get into the Colombian parliament right now.
Peru,
But he
Peru,
also
Peru, Peru.
in Peru, sorry. But apparently he also has some more serious accusations of sexual assault and so on. I mean, he denies them all, but I think those processes are open. So I mean, we've talked about Peru for some time now, ever since remember Castillo went into power, and
Hmm.
that was a hopeful moment in a country where politics is so rotten. And then we kind of watched it
Yeah, yeah,
unfold,
yeah.
and it
Fall
didn't turn
apart.
out so well. And then the Guaido of Colombia, Dina Boluarte, went into power, and it was just horrible in terms of privatizations, human rights abuses, cracking down on protests and so on, and she was just beyond unpopular. And there was a wave of protests right now, and we shouldn't underestimate the importance of having people out in the streets and so on. But my understanding is that there are elections next year, they can no longer avoid them. And the main political parties on the right did not want, I mean, they felt that Boluarte was becoming a hindrance, and so they decided to get rid of her as opposed to letting her drag them down in the upcoming elections.
Uh-huh.
And so they let her live in shame, have this kind of placeholder figure for a while, and then figure out how they're going to recompose and win again or try to win again. Might be, Fujimori's daughter getting back in the presidency next year.
Goodness.
Yeah, I mean, in his, Alberto Fujimori, the former president, and former resident of Milwaukee, by the way.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We never told you that. Oh, yeah. He used to live on Edgewood Avenue, in right near the university. He was
a friend of ours,
math professor.
Yeah, converted the attic or whatever, built a extra room for him. So.
Yeah. He stayed there and earned one of his degrees here, and he was considered briefly for an honorary degree from University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, but a friend of ours, Professor Howard Handelman, put the kibosh on that. It was just a no-go. It's like this guy is no good. He's going to drag you down. Sorry. And it turned out to be true, because he wound up being
an embarrassment.
Yeah, he wound up being an embarrassment and fleeing to Japan.
So it's not the local attraction in Milwaukee.
No.
Yeah. So it's but it was an interesting intersection to have him here, and have him, I mean, when he was like elected president, it was like, oh wow, the Cambio 90 movement. Oh, this is we have a Milwaukee, someone with a degree from UWM is now president of another country. That is so cool. And then it just didn't quite turn out as nice, with the auto golpe and then all the subsequent stuff, and like, I mean, there was some, all the stuff that he did along with Vladimir Montesinos in the background, and so yeah, and his daughter being this sort of fascist follow-up figure for him, and his wife was just in the news too. I guess the Supreme Court went back and exonerated her, or nullified some old charges against her. So. So. Anyhow.
Yeah, so I guess we can go back to Peru in a few months and see who's shaping up in the upcoming elections. I mean, there's always an issue when there are these long periods of instability that, the candidate of law and order becomes more appealing. And especially in the case of Castillo, we discussed that, there was this popular support, but he never managed to trust it, or he never managed to get it sufficiently organized to actually confront these entrenched forces in parliament who were just waiting for the right moment to impeach him. So now the question is, has there been any progress in reorganizing these forces from below to actually challenge for the destinies of the country, or is it just going to be on the elite to find kind of a more presentable solution? Because some of these issues are structural, these economic issues are structural.
I mean, Peru has always been such a tough nut for the left, because it's like no one there who gets elected, who is more on the left or progressive side ever is like really that good, or they always are. They don't have the structures behind them to like keep them there and allow them to do things,
or they just end up removed in a coup. So yeah, I think of all the Latin American or all South American countries, at least, it's probably the one where we've never seen any kind of prolonged leftist experiment. You had Ollanta Humala in 2006, but he just gradually migrated to the right. But if we're talking about the prospects of the left and the right, maybe we can just head on over to Peru's neighbor in Bolivia,
yeah.
who now have a new president. And I'm not going to recommend that people listen to our old shows when we talked about Bolivia, because you never know. I think.
Well, the discussions of Bolivia in our previous shows have always been kind of depressing anyway. I mean,
Yeah, I don't
it's
think
like the
we
left
made
imploding in Bolivia.
I don't think we made any kind of outlandish prediction that turned out to be way off the mark. But it's kind of a slow.
We
We
didn't
were
say Evo
watching.
Morales is on his way back. He's unstoppable.
We were watching this disaster unfold in slow motion, and
Yeah.
maybe we had some little glimpses of hope. Oh, maybe they are going to find an agreement and a consensus candidate. But in the end, it was
No.
No.
just an unmitigated disaster. And now there's a new president.
Well,
The legal
I think what we said was all fair. I think there were like some real hopes along the way that got dashed. I don't think that everything
Yeah,
was
there were
unreasonable.
prospects, but in the end, they didn't, and they being at least Evo and President Luis Arce, they didn't put the project's survival, never mind well-being, the project's mere survival above their own interests. So I think in the end, that it shouldn't just be on the two of them. I mean, of course, there are structural issues we should talk about. This is also a moment to analyze what happened to the MAS, to the party, in these 20 years, that it did not have the internal strength and structure to overcome this personal infighting, right? I mean, it's also a testament to how social movements were not able to create a platform to overcome these personal agendas and egos and so on. But in the case of the new president, he has this profile of the outsider who's not really an outsider, the outsider who has been a mayor, who has been a congressman and so on, but somehow, because he's not associated to the main parties, he does have this aura of being something new. And in a way, when politics get so exhausted, and in the case of Bolivia, that's clearly the case, anyone who seems to come from the outside has an advantage in that sense. But I mean, for all intents and purposes, he's been within the system for a long time. And so now the big question is, we were talking about the left in Peru, and this is applies to Bolivia, but also applies everywhere else, because I've been fortunate to come on this show for a long time. And maybe around 2019, 2020, we're talking about, how these right-wing neoliberal governments were exhausted, and this was maybe a second wave of the pink tide with, Bolivia, Argentina, and so on. But now, I mean, these leftist progressive governments have also been exhausted, and they
Right.
are, in many cases, going out of power. And so now the right is coming back. So the question is, who is learning lessons from their failures better? Is it the left or the right? And in the case of Bolivia, you remember the coup and how these fascists just became drunk with power and started burning the Wifala flag and
Oh yeah, yeah.
persecuting the indigenous majority in plain sight and executing massacres and so on. So has the Bolivian right learned a lesson from that, and can it actually survive this time around? Because the issue is, for a long time, this, I don't know, 75% majority of the country was just invisible. They were just on the Altiplano, these highland regions and so on, and they were to be ignored. But now you had 20 years of the indigenous majority being in power. It has created an indigenous middle class and indigenous bourgeoisie. So you can no longer just bully them into silence and into invisibility.
Right.
So the lesson, or does the new president realize that he needs to find these consensus? And also, the model in Bolivia, like many other countries, hinges on resource extraction and distribution to ensure that there is some kind of reasonable living standards, controlling inflation and all that. So if he goes crazy and starts privatizing everything, even if he gets some sort of IMF loan, it's not going to be sustainable in the long run. So this guy seemed more sensible than his opponent, who was former President Tuto Quiroga. So the question is, does he have the ability to retain some of the pillars of the mass government, even though this has nothing to do with the mass government, to ensure that there is some kind of social peace, and then he can gradually return to neoliberalism, because that's what it's about at the end of the day? Or is he just going to go crazy and unleash these fascist forces and collide head on with the majority? And in that sense, I mean, because one thing that could unite the mass base again is being under direct attack.
Sure.
Right. I mean, that would be a disaster for the right. They could do everything that Maria Corina Machado wants to do in Venezuela, and it would just be a huge backlash against them, and they'd fail.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, yeah, let's see, because I mean, he's also not getting the economy that existed in Bolivia 5 years ago. I mean, there are some serious structural issues in terms of fuel shortages, inflation. So it's a challenge for him. And again, let's see how he operates. If he's going straight to the IMF to get some short-term relief and then kick the can down the road. That's all going to be on the table.
And then the next guy has to deal with it.
And they're landlocked, so China can't even build them a port.
I mean, China built a port in Peru. The largest port in Latin America is the largest port on the Pacific coast is in Peru. So I think we've talked a lot about the multipolar world, but still, business is business.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, in the last 8 minutes, what would you like to discuss?
I mean, there are a couple of things we can touch upon. I don't know if you saw when Milei went to Washington, and he was there exchanging pleasantries with Trump. He's asking for money, essentially. So he came to power with this promise that he was going to put a chainsaw and fix everything, and was going to be prosperous and businesses would boom and so on.
And that didn't work out.
Hasn't exactly turned out like that. I mean, they've gone to the IMF again. They burned a lot of money with their currency exchange system, and so he went to Washington.
Well, I mean, I think the thing was they soared briefly and then crashed tremendously.
Yes, and so there's this scene where, and you can see it in fast forward, but he's talking for some 20 minutes, and you see Trump, and Trump is nodding along and so on, and then he finishes, and Trump asks, can anyone interpret that? Is there a translation? So he didn't listen to a single word. And then Milei wanted to, say it again, and Trump, oh no, it's okay, don't bother. And last night he was on Air Force One. I don't know where he was going, and the reporter was saying, because the MAGA crowd is also a bit unreasonable, and that's the fourth euphemism of the day. And so they were saying, oh, this deal with Argentina is very unfavorable to the US. And Trump was mocking it, saying, oh, have you seen Argentina? They are dying over there. I mean, I like this president, but they are dying over there. So I mean, yeah, not a great show for. Oh, and the other thing, he said, oh, we'll help you out with this financial package, but only if you win the election. But no one, between the US advisors and the Argentinian advisors, no one explained to Trump that these are midterm elections. So Milei is not running for re-election.
It's just for Congress.
He could leave office and run for a congressional seat.
I mean, yeah,
they let you hold both at the same time in Argentina?
But it just goes to show how much interest Trump has in the South American countries. So that wasn't Milei's best moment, but then
go talk to Rubio.
Yeah, right.
And then I mean, there's an upcoming summit of the Americas that's going to be in the Dominican Republic, and I think it's in December, but it's already in the news because under pressure from the Trump administration, the Dominicans refused to invite Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, the axis of evil.
And Petro says that Colombia is not attending for that reason.
Yeah, and so Petro now saying that Colombia will not go. I think the Mexican president has also said she's not going. She might send some low-level envoy.
Yeah, I mean, can we just briefly break everything else just to give a shout out to Claudia Sheinbaum? She is amazing, and she is like incredibly popular with her opposition. Only slightly less than with her own party, and it's I can just imagine Trump going down to Mexico and mocking her and saying how unpopular she is. But the polls all show that she's like just crushing it.
Yeah, actually, I remember we discussed when she was either about to be elected or was just elected that we said, she has some big shoes to fill because AMLO had his own contradiction and so on, but he was very firm in certain aspects of his policy. And now, this is someone new. How is she going to be? And also because AMLO had to deal mostly with Democrats, and now here's a new person and Trump had this whole rhetoric of anti-migration and Mexico is ripping us off. So, how does she handle these constant tensions with the US? And I think so far she has exceeded expectations. She's been very firm without provoking unnecessary conflict, but without ever just completely bowing down to US interests. Remember these standoffs on tariffs,
yes,
where Trump would just threaten a lot, and she said, "Oh, if you want to do it, go ahead." And then Trump, a few weeks later, would just scale it back to some other number. So I think, absolutely deserved shout out here on The Grass is Green to Claudia Sheinbaum. I'm sure one of her advisors will let her know.
Oh, that just sounds like you're mocking us now. We know we're not. We know she's not listening.
All right, you were saying before we got off on.
Before I interrupted and diverted you.
Oh yeah, the Summit of the Americas. I think it's another example, as you were mentioning in the beginning, on how that there's a clear sign that this administration wants to bring some sort of hegemony and control back to the Western Hemisphere. The question is, can it actually do it with just brute force? And what we're seeing so far, I mean, you were talking about how this bombing campaign on the high seas is now alienating more and more countries, and the same with this idea of having a summit and trying to leave out the main adversaries, and how it's already backfiring in the sense that perhaps two of the most important countries in the hemisphere, certainly for US interests, Mexico and Colombia, are now not going to participate, or at least not going to participate at a high level. So there is certainly a very strong tension developing between this agenda of reimposing US control over the hemisphere, and maybe the conditions are a bit better now than with more leftist governments a few years ago. But the Trump administration...
The Monroe Doctrine doesn't go as well as it used to.
Yes, so the question is...
And it doesn't pair well with massive random tariffs either.
Yeah, it doesn't pair well with massive tariffs and bombings at sea and so on. So it's just a brute force Monroe Doctrine, which of course causes a lot of pain in the hemisphere. But if it's actually advancing US interests, at least the evidence so far is that it's not.
All right. And with that, we have to say goodbye because our music about to play us out. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ricardo.